Howdy, howdy, music lovers. Welcome to the first episode of Modern Musicology's new series, Five Albums With. And this week, we are joined by one of our regular co-hosts, Rob Levy. Rob,
Hello,
what's
sir.
going
How are
on,
you?
man?
Not
Oh,
much.
I'm all right. So this series was inspired by when I meet new people. I'd love to dig through their record collection because I feel like
Yes.
you find out a lot of really cool things about somebody by digging through their records. And so I thought it'd be fun to do a little show where we have different people on each time and they dig through their own record collections, and they'll pick out five records that they want to highlight. And it's something that I used to do when I was doing a different YouTube channel, and it was a lot of fun. So I kind of miss doing it. So we are going to get that started. And I thought it'd be cool to get to know our co-hosts a little bit more so audience can get to know us a little bit better. So Rob, you're the one kicking this off with us, baby.
So I have a question for you.
Uh-oh.
Do you just like go into their house like when you're there and just like head straight for the records, or do you like, where's your record collection, or how do you sort of make the move to get access to their record collection to look through it?
Usually it's visible, it's
Yeah.
in the living room, or it's somewhere where people can actually see it, and then I just invite myself over to rummage through
Just
it.
come in
And
and sit
then
down.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then I just ask questions about what they've got in their collection and why they have it and what they enjoy about it, and
Because I will come to a party, I'll like sit down, I'll start rooting through it. I'm like, what's with this? What's with
yeah,
this?
yeah.
I thought I was the only person in the world that did that. So that's
Oh
awesome.
gosh, I've done that ever since high school. I used to go
Yeah.
over to my best friend David's house, and we would dig through his older brother's records, and I found all kinds of great stuff that way that I never would have discovered elsewise.
Yeah. I'm to the point now where if I do that, I carry a notepad.
That's a good
So,
idea.
so if there's stuff I've never seen,
Yeah.
particularly if they have a lot of like jazz or reggae or something, I have no idea what it is, or metal, and I'm like, ooh,
Metal.
that's how I found out about Ghost, which our friend
Yeah.
Anthony loves.
Yep.
So
Okay, so let's pretend that I am over at your house and I am looking through your records. What are some of the things that I am going to discover? And
so it's
and before you let me see, when I said pick five albums, what was your like mindset going into it? Did you have a theme in mind? Did you just pick five random things?
it was
Or
like, oh crap, I have to pick only five. Because that was kind of a weird process, right? I went for records that were personal to me or had some sort of an impact on my development as a music person.
yeah,
Because I think anyone could just find, oh, I love these five records and pull them.
exactly.
Because if you own them, you're just pulling five. But I thought, for the sake of making your show sound good, try to hide five that I didn't think would be on your list, or Stephanie's list, or Anthony's, right?
Yeah.
And also try to have five that I had sort of like stories behind or
Yes.
could explain why. And there were two or three that I'm like, now have caused consternation because, like, for example, I have no idea where my copy of Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On" is.
Ooh.
I know it's here somewhere, and I don't know
Mhm.
where my copy of "Songs in the Key of Life" is. And I'm like,
Oh
where'd that
man.
go? Yeah. So there's very interesting. I'm like, I am not going to like tear this place apart trying to find it now. That's for another day. So I had a list of 10 that I weeded down to five with like two alternates.
Okay.
It's like picking an ice skating team for the Olympics. I got my five and my two alternates, right? Yeah. But I wanted to have, I tried to have stories behind them, because I think one of the things I love about talking about music is the story behind music,
Right. Right.
and I think that's one of the things that's really strong about our podcast, is that all of us have different stories about how we came to like something or
Mhm.
not like something, and everybody's is going to be different.
Right. All right.
That
Well,
was my mindset.
let's jump into it. Let's see what five things you've picked. What's the first one you want to highlight for us?
Uh, you know what? I'm not going to start with the obvious one. I'm going to start with, and I picked CDs because at this point it was easier to get CDs than to move
Mhm.
crap and get to the vinyl.
Mhm.
Um, Long story, but they're in a closet. Um, most people put clothes in a closet. I have crates of records stacked. And I meant to take a picture of all this for you, but I forgot. Anyway, and first of all, I still believe in the compact disc because the sound quality is great. You can
Yeah.
move the room without it skipping, and you don't have to clean it all the time. So there is that. So some of these I do have on vinyl, but I also have on CD because I'm that guy. But yeah, so I started with this guy, the old school Velvet Underground and Nico.
Yes.
Right. Couple reasons for this. You want me just to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Couple reasons for this. I was in high school. I went to an all boys Catholic school, and in the 80s, it was not cool to be quote unquote the new wave or punk kid, at school. And I had an English teacher there, and he saw me one day, and he's like, you look like the kind of guy that would like the Velvet Underground. And I said, I've heard of them, but I haven't gotten to them yet, And to be fair, I discovered Creedence in high school, and I liked them, and I didn't expect to like them, right? So he's like, I'm gonna come back tomorrow. I'll get you something. I'm like, okay. So I come back. He gives me a cassette, and it's this, right? And he's like, Andy Warhol did the cover. I'm like, oh, I love pop art. It's not my favorite type of visual art, but I'm fascinated by Warhol and sort of like his cross mediums and the fact that all these bands played at the factory, and he's an artist that stretches into things I love, like books and film and visual arts. So that was part of once I'm like, ooh, Warhol did the cover, right? And then, it's like, clearly they have the black leather jacket aesthetic that is necessary in most adolescent boys' musical development, right? It is either leather pants or leather jackets in some way, shape, or form, right? Whether it's Susie Quattro or Iggy Pop or David Bowie or Armored Saint, right? It's still, anyway. So yeah, Velvet Underground and Nico, right? And I had, I love this, right? And then I ended up making friends with a girl in high school. And we both were supposed to go to a dance, and we skipped it because everybody there was just kind of a jerk, and the band playing was like terrible. So we ended up hanging out the playground over by her school and playing this on cassette. And she was way more into it than I expected, right? She's like, oh, I have this. And so it's also the first album I remember having a conversation with one of the other sex about why I love this record, right? So Sunday Morning is still fantastic, right? First of all, this record could be made today, right? This could be like a Dandy Warhol's record, a Black Angels record. It could be a Black Motorcycle Club record. I mean, bands make this kind of stuff today now. This record is huge upon American indie music in general, right? I would learn this later because I was not smart like you when I was young, that this record also kind of takes some stuff from glam as well, right? I didn't know what that was. I just knew it was David Bowie and Alice Cooper and all these people. I didn't know they had a name for it. So this was kind of a gateway to glam for me too. Like I went from this to T-Rex and then kind of into Roxy and stuff like that. So it's a gateway drug, right? This record is a gateway drug for so many friggin' people, right? And it does me hope now to see all the kids walking around in Velvet Underground and Nico shirts today, right? First of all, so you have Sunday Morning, which is great. It's fantastic. I'm Waiting for the Man, which is like amazing. I love Lou Reed's storytelling. One of the things I love about Lou Reed is how he tells stories. And I'll tell you a Lou Reed story in a minute. Venus and Furs is really good. It's kind of sad and melancholy. And you have Nico's voice, which is just terrific. All Tomorrow's Parties, I love. Heroin is just kind of weird. I'm like, what is this, right? I'll Be Your Mirror is kind of like, it's the song where Nico sounds the most foreign on it, like she's not from America. And then the Black Angels Death song, what is that bit of awesomeness, right? And like the drumming on it is like, everyone talks about Lou Reed or John Cale, but the drumming on the early Velvet records, like Mo Tucker's just amazing. Right. And I don't think oh shit, I'm talking about drumming with a drummer. This is bad. But Mo Tucker is fantastic. Yeah. And her drumming on this is amazing. Like everybody is like bringing their A game with this record.
Right.
So I think it's fantastic. I think Sunday Morning is probably still my favorite. It's got that really kind of mellow thing. I also think, I know we talked about this, I think on podcast 9 or something. It's one of the best opening tracks on a record that I love. Right. I just think it's a perfect setting the table. But I think I'm Waiting for the Man, maybe one of the best second tracks on an album, right? Because you really, when you listen to this, you're like, this is what New York was like when this record was made. This is what that whole infamous New York art scene was like. You listen to this, it's like, it's a slice of life,
Yeah.
right? But it also is very contemporary. It's kind of in two places. And a lot of my records are in two places at once, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, I do think this is very much a sound photograph. It just
yes.
puts you right in the place where it was made. It is a snapshot of everything that was kind of going on in that scene at the time.
Yeah. And this is the part where you just pat me on the head and shake your head and go, "Oh, Rob, like I had no idea till I owned this record for like 2 or 3 years that like Lou Reed and David Bowie operated in the same universe, right?" When I found that out, I was like, "Oh my God, like imagine if I got this and I heard about Transformer, right?" I'm like, "Oh my God," right? So this helps you to understand Lou Reed and appreciate why Lou Reed is one of the great American songwriters that people don't consider to be a great songwriter, right? Um, you know, it's, and I think it's also a tragedy, really, that this lineup of the band didn't sustain,
Mm.
because this is a fantastic musical lineup, right? Um, and I think that the partnership between Lou Reed and John Cale is very similar to like the Davis Brothers and the Kinks, or Lennon and McCartney, or
Yeah.
Brian Love and Brian Wilson. It's very much two people coming together at the right time. And you listen to this and you're like, yeah, they're playing a warehouse. These are guys that play in a warehouse, right? Um, and most of my bands, I think, are bands that would play in a warehouse. But you know, and I kind of think of like another record I almost put on the list was Pet Sounds, but I figured Stephanie would do that, so I let her take that. But I kind of think of this record as like the antithesis of Pet Sounds, which I also love.
Hmm.
Like
Oh,
Pet Sounds
I
is
can see that.
Pet Sounds is like uplifting and beautiful and bright and sunny, and this is dark and grimy and gritty, and like it's like watch where you walk. There's needles on the ground, and look at me, I got a leather jacket, right, and sunglasses, right?
Right. Pet
Um,
Sounds is also very crafted. It's very
yeah,
layered. It's very like, they really spent time building these songs and the arrangements and everything.
yeah,
And that is not the case with the Velvet Underground. It is very immediate and
yeah,
very, right in your face kind of thing.
and coming out of liking a lot of punk and new wave stuff, because my journey is different than anybody else's in the podcast with music, because I heard my brother's like gay disco records growing up, and my sister's like sort of 70s rock records growing up, and then my dad's big band and swing, right?
Yeah.
But I sort of went right from that into new wave, and I came back to all the Zeppelin and all that stuff sort of like after, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of backwards. So this got me like to like really appreciate the Doors. This got me really to appreciate like lots of other stuff, right? Um, and so for that part of it, it's also great too. But the sequencing on it is really great. Just the track order is perfect. Like Heroines is just the right spot.
Hmm.
Um, I'll Be Your Mirror is like, yeah, that's a later part of the record kind of a thing. And you can't really get away with putting European Sun or Black Angel's Death Song on earlier in the record, right?
No. Yeah. Agreed.
But coming out of someone that listened to a lot of punk, this was very, very much also, while it was very orchestrated and layered and textured, because I like records that are layered and textured, it also is very raw. And I
Hmm.
really liked a lot of raw stuff in there. So,
Yeah.
and then
Well,
my Lou Reed story is when I lived in New York in 1993. I went to St. Mark's Comics to buy comics, and I'm heading back to get to the subway, and I'm in the Village, and I'm walking across the street. I look across the street, and there's Lou Reed carrying a bag of groceries, and I just kind of just stood there and just watched Lou Reed carry groceries. And I never really thought about, yeah, I guess these guys have to carry their own groceries. It was just so weird. I was just like, I didn't want to like, like there's definitely, if there's any buddy in this era of music you probably would feel less comfortable trying to just randomly talk to, it's Lou Reed. Like you probably
yeah.
could come up and say hi to Bowie or Iggy, or even Brian Ferry, but Lou Reed's the guy you just kind of don't want to talk to, right? And that's part of the mystique of the band too. It's like these do not seem like friendly people, but it's okay, right? Whereas like Pet Sounds, you're like, yeah, I want to hang out at the beach with these guys. Or if you listen to the Kinks, you're like, yeah, I could hang out at the Village Green, right? Or you listen to Sparks, you're like, man, I want to go to whatever party those guys are going to. Same thing with the Go-Go's, right? So that's kind of where I'm at with that.
All right. That sounds good. So I just want to say really quickly that for anybody watching, if you have a question or comment or want to chime in on any of the albums that Rob is going to be talking about, feel free to do so. We'll get your comment or question as we go along. What else you got for us, Rob?
So this is kind of a nice segue from that, right?
Okay.
But this record still remains one of my favorite records. And I have a friend of mine who loves this band but hates the first two albums, so they're dead to me. But I picked Psycho Candy by the Jesus and Mary Chain.
Oh, wow.
Right. Couple reasons. I guess I'll start at the beginning. 1985-ish, right? I am a disaffected and weird young kid. And I went to a record store. The first time I went, this is gonna get me into so much trouble. I went to the record store with a girl, all right, for the very first time. And so it was like, okay, I got to pick the right records and all that stuff, right? Because, at the time you're like trying to figure that crap out. So I saw this and I'm like, this looks bizarre. And then they played, they dropped, it was like the week it came out. And it was like, back in the days, you'd go to record stores, kids, and they would play records in the stores that just came in. And you could like ask the person, what is this record or whatever, right? They would actually play records in a record store, kids ask your grandparents. But I heard them drop the needle on this, like the first week it came out. And you hear those opening moments of Just Like Honey. And you're like, okay, this is the Beach Boys and the Velvet Underground. What the fuck is this? Right? Oh my God. And they're Scottish, right? Which is like even cooler because obviously I'm of the age where it's like if a band was from Britain, you like stopped and paid more attention to them, right? Because we're dumb. But Just Like, I mean, this is probably one of the greatest pieces of late 20th century art that emerged from the United Kingdom, right? So the other great thing about the Jesus and Mary Chain is I went to Chicago to go see them. I was really excited. I get there. They come out on stage. Their backs are to the audience. Well, first of all, you can't see them because they own not one, but like 900 smoke machines, right? You're not getting lung cancer just standing there, like waiting for them to come on, right? It's like those B movies where they're in Dracula's castle and they just keep pouring the smoke, right? So you just see these dudes in leather jackets, right? And it takes you a minute to realize that the guys on stage are not the roadies, that's them. And wait, their backs are turned to the audience, right? And then they played for 27 minutes, put their instruments down, like you just did with your microphone, and then walked away, right? And the same, so you're pissed about this, right? Because you paid, $8 to go. You want, that $8 was like a lot of money back then. And then they like, what is this? But then you realize this is like Sex Pistols awesome, right? So they really changed a lot of things, right? They brought the Beach Boys and Johnny Cash and, Bowie and the Velvets all in one place, right? It's all that put together, right? There's just so many things happening with this band. So you get Just Like Honey, which is great. Then you get The Living End, and it's like, okay, first of all, it's got a dirge, right? It's just noise, and it's crowded, and it's cramped, and it's like, but then they write love songs, right? So like, The Living End is great. Taste the Floor is just like visceral and angry. If you ever wanted to know what it was like to taste a razor blade, listen to that song. The Hardest Walk, which was later re-recorded for the Some Kind of Wonderful soundtrack, is great. That's kind of more similar to Just Like Honey. But then they go to Cut Dead, which is this very slow, very, very sort of Beach Boys on amphetamines kind of record, right? And then In a Hole is Dirty and Grimy. And then Taste of Cindy, which is 1 minute and 32 seconds of just like, balls to the wall guitars, right? Sowing Seeds is kind of slow. So they're alternating, fast and slow, fast and slow. My Little Underground, You Trip Me Up is great. You Trip Me Up is just like, if you wanted to know, like, what if I had a headache, what would that sound like, right? You just listen to like You Trip Me Up, right? And then It's So Hard is great too. And the album cover, they're so indifferent. Look at this cover. They are just basically indifferent. Like, it's like, well, we're here. They have to take a picture. It's like, this is what they're doing when they're waiting for the picture to be taken. And it's the album cover, right? And graphic wise, it's very cool. and just like Honey is such an important part of like Lost in Translation, that film. So it's also very late night. Again, it's dirty and grimy thing, but when you listen to the Jesus and Mary chain, right? They very much take all of their influences on their sleeves, right? Which I think I mentioned before. But they also, and this is the thing that's interesting, they laid the groundwork for like Ride and Lush and My Bloody Valentine and anything that we would refer to today as like shoegazer, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of where, and some of those bands were already around, but these guys are kind of the guys that knocked down that door 40 years ago. And we kind of really started paying attention to foot pedals, right? It stopped being, and I don't think they get into, and Bobby Gillespie from Primal Scream was their drummer, right? But I don't think people realize that, they really laid the foundation for so much contemporary kind of music now, right? And their attitude and their ethos of like, we're going to make this record. It doesn't really have a rhyme or a reason to it. The songs are short, they're edgy, they're grimy, and they're dirty, but that's okay. They are not clean and polished. Their imaging is not clean and polished. The first time I saw an interview with them on 120 minutes, that was kind of my introduction to what did they just say with Scottish accents. And my ability now to understand Scottish people talking in films is due to trying to understand the Jesus and Mary chain in interviews. Because you couldn't really understand what they were saying. And that was so they had this mystique about them. Like, you walk into a record store and people are like, I don't know what this is, right? I don't know what this is, but I like it. This is great, right? Or I'm not sure where these guys came from or what they're doing, but it's fantastic. And you listen to the Reed. And they don't necessarily, before the brothers from Oasis didn't like each other, Jim and William Reed didn't really like each other very much either, right? It's very much a band of, and the Kinks, that they're kind of the bridge between the Kinks and that, but they very much are locking heads on where they are, right? And that really makes the music great. And then they worked with Hope Sandoval from Mazzy Star. They worked with they have a record with Shane MacGowan called God Help Me that's amazing. So they kind of the first two records they did okay, and then they kind of had a weird phase and they tried to break in America, and that's kind of what made it odd after that. But like in a time in the in the mid 80s when people are like, okay, we're tired of new wave and everybody's doing post-punk. What is this? It's I don't think you can really explain it. It's Motown, it's Johnny Cash. There's it's just there's even a little bit of rockabilly in it. I mean, they like so many different things in there. And they probably do get a large portion of their influence from the Stones. You hear a lot of the Rolling Stones in there too, as most records of the mid 80s are. So that's kind of why I picked that one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 3. What else you got?
Number 3, I'm gonna bust out this one, Echo and the Bunnymen, Ocean Rain.
Oh my, that's
produced
crazy.
Produced by Bill Drummond, later of the KLF, right? Recorded in Liverpool. They are probably outside of the Beatles, the second biggest band ever to come out of Liverpool. Well, maybe I'll say Jerry and the Pacemakers, but they're one of the big bands that came out of Liverpool. And this thing, again, I was at a party with a girl, and it's the first record I made out with a girl to, which is, like, what is this? I'm like, it's like, wait a minute, hold on. I know this is supposed to be like a big moment of my adolescence, but what record are you playing? Right. That kind of defined my life at this point, where I knew I was going to be a big loser. Yeah. So it starts with like Silver, which is just a fantastic bit of pop. Then Nocturnal Me, which is this very sort of like up and down. And the thing that's great about it is it's so orchestral, right? And then you get Yo-Yo Man, which is weird. Thorn of Crowds. Then we get to The Killing Moon, right? Where if you listen to The Killing Moon, you're like, man, this is incredible. And again, The Killing Moon and its, evil twin brother, Under the Milky Way by The Church, are sort of these two records that kind of defined part of the underground sound of the 80s, right? It's impossible to hear Killing Moon now without thinking of like Donnie Darko or, you know, and it was also, I think, a video that got on 120 minutes a lot too. And then
Yeah.
Seven Seas, which is great. It's really poppy. My Kingdom's great. Ocean Rain is like this sort of like tranquil, great ending track.
Hmm.
As a whole album, it's amazing, right? The photography is great. If you read the history of the record, they were basically in this boat in a cave, cold as hell, for like 900 hours while they take the picture, and they're just like, we're done, right? I love Echo and the Bunnymen so much that I went to the beach outside of Liverpool, where they did the cover for Heaven Up Here, which is a different record from them. And I was so excited. I was like, I almost forgot I was in the beach, right? So I'm that guy. And I found where the cave is to this, but I can't get to it. But yeah, I mean, it's dark. Again, this is related to like the Velvet Underground and the Beatles and
Hmm.
Bowie. Like when you listen to the Jesus and Mary chain, I think Jack Black said it great in High Fidelity. They picked up where your precious Echo and the Bunnymen left off, and they're still around, they're touring, and they still tour this record. But part of the appeal of Ian McCulloch's voice is that, he sounds like a chain smoker who sings, and it doesn't hurt, his voice is still kind of good. It's still kind of in really good shape, right? And it's also the first time I met somebody in a band and it was a case of don't meet your heroes, right? While as Will Sargent was lovely, like when I had Will Sargent on my show, he was pleasant, he was nice, he would answer any question we had. It was a fantastic, like, hour interview. It was supposed to be 30. Ian McCulloch was just like, get me in, get me out, and give me my money, right? Very much, I'm a rock star, right? That guy thinks he's Lou Reed, right? Or he thinks he's Lou Reed, but he wants to be David Bowie. That's the best way to describe, Ian McCulloch. And the hair, even still now, is perfectly coiffed, right? But again, you get the sunglasses in dark, you get the leather jackets, you sort of get, they are probably, and obviously they covered People Are Strange later, but they are closely
Right.
related to the Doors, musically, but they're also kind of married to the Beach Boys a little bit too, and some of that other stuff, and very much so the Beatles, right? And for me too, it came along at a time where like I was really listening to a lot of like indie music and stuff, and I'm not really sure what about it spoke to me. I mean, I loved Nocturnal Me because it's kind of this like, it's sort of like very soundtracky. I'm going to invent a word. It was very much soundtracky. And then, the orchestral strings on this and Seven Seas and stuff is really beautiful. So there's a really sort of gorgeous melody thing going on here, right?
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
also this sense of like, I don't want to say fear, but like Killing Moon is just kind of spooky, right?
Yeah. Very much so.
Very spooky, and it's very much kind of got an atmosphere to it. So this record is dripping with atmosphere, right?
Yeah.
And Liverpool at this time, you've got Echo and the Bunnymen, you've got Julian Cope doing stuff with Teardrop Explodes, you've got OMD, you've got the Wild Swans, you've got Holly Johnson and the Frankie guys doing Big in Japan, you've got the best band that never made it, Dalek, I Love You. You have all these great bands, kicking around Liverpool, and there was a club in Liverpool called Eric's, and they were kind of they started off like really like Eric's was like the Cavern Club of the 80s, right? And Eric's really made Echo and the Bunnymen. And so this record kind of came out from them playing and playing and playing and playing, and they just wanted to do something that wasn't just a normal rock record. It's like, let's try to do something different. So they put a lot more strings into it and some melodies, and I think it really enriched their sound, right? And this is like, there's sometimes an album will come out and you hear the growth in the band. Like you hear OK Computer by Radiohead, and you're like, okay, these guys have got it now, and they're off to the races, right?
Yeah.
While the earlier Echo and the Bunnymen records are good, if not better than this, you just hear this and you're like, this is a band on top of its game, and they're off to the races too.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say that I never really, other than hearing stuff on the radio, I never really gave this band a lot of time. And it wasn't until I was in a band and we were doing a cover of Killing Moon that we changed the arrangement a little bit. We
Mhm.
kind of like accentuated it a bit and changed the tempo some and kind of made it our own. But that's really when I started to kind of pay attention to this album, at least. And I really came to love it a lot.
Yeah, and it's also it's kind of like the goths really embrace this record. Like
Hmm.
I went to a goth night, my first goth night in years, a couple months ago, and they played Nocturnal Me. I'm like, what? You know, um, it's kind of got this staying power to it, but it sort of transcended a lot of sort of genres, right? I have friends that are classical musicians that they love this record for the arrangements, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have, yeah, and it should not be Will Sargent's work on this record should not be underestimated. Pete DeFreitas, I think, plays drums on it. The late Pete DeFreitas is
Yeah.
really great.
Yeah.
And it's just got a lot going on, and it's pretty great. And it's one of these records that, like, when I don't know what I want to listen to, this is what I put on. So
Hmm.
yeah.
All right. Well, that's 3 down.
Um,
What you going to feature next?
so now we are going to shift completely in different directions, right?
Okay. Sounds good.
Um, so I used to go to this juice bar called the Animal House, right? It was about 5 blocks from my house, right? Friday night was like you'd go and they'd have bands play. Sometimes they were metal hair bands, sometimes they were new wave bands, sometimes they were punk band. But they have a band play, and then you hear a lot. That would be a combination. It was in an old movie theater too, so it had a shit ton of space in it. So they would play everything from like Dead or Alive videos to, like, the first time I saw Take on Me on a video by Aha was like, but they'd put them on a movie screen, right?
Right.
So you got to see like the whole like emergence of video stuff, but then the and 12-inch single culture and all this all at once, right? I would not be playing records on the radio today if I did not get exposed to this stuff when I was like 15, 16, and 17, right? Just going and like they used to have, like, in the same way that now that we have compilation albums, they would have for DJs compilation video albums, and they would put the VHS tape in, and it would just play video after video, and it
Hmm.
had little Chiron typed, and they'd have remix videos and stuff. I first heard like "Hit That Perfect Beat" by Bronski Beat there, and the video
Yes.
for like "True Faith" by New Order, and we were all little hoodlums that, um, probably as an art school collective, it's kind of like all these kids that it was fascinating too to be in middle America, and this is a melting pot. There's kids that came from the affluent part of town. There were kids from the city, kids from the county, but they all had goofy haircuts. We used to chase each other, or kids do not do this. We used to chase each other around with bottles of Aquanet hairspray and lighters.
Yeah.
um and it was kind of very much a place where you could come into your own, whether you were straight or gay, or you just didn't know what you were doing with your life. You could just go here and enjoy music and dance. And I would sit on the old crappy blue cigarette hold couches and just literally talk to all these people about music all the time. Right. So I used to go there every week, and it was great. And you could meet girls. And that's when I realized, if you knew a lot about music, that was huge, right? Especially if you spend half of your life being a weird, nerdy kid like me with bangs and shaved head and stuff. Um, so I'm there one night, and they always would play new stuff like late at night. And sometimes you heard stuff and you're like, like the first time you heard like King, or like Sido Echo, you're like, what is this, right? Whatever, right? And some of it's stuff that doesn't really stick anymore, right? But there's one night I'm there, and they played um, the 12-inch single for West End Girls.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
11:47 in the evening on an evening in May. I remember that much. And I'm just like, what the hell is this? Right. Because I had already liked New Order at that point. I'd heard a little bit of New Order.
Hmm.
But a lot of the stuff I liked was like a lot of the stuff I'd heard at this point from that decade with dancing was like ABC, Dead or Alive, Bananarama, Duran Duran. Duran Duran was everywhere. Culture Club was everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the dance music, Depeche Mode was still kind of sugary, right? So like a lot of the stuff you're hearing is it's fantastic, right? But it's also very kind of a disposable, kind of sort of glittery. Some of it like Gary Newman, and some of that stuff is very dark, right? And then you get to West End Girls, like, wow, this is really like sophisticated. This is, and I was a big history guy and an English guy. I'm like, this is a record for people that love history and people that like to read novels and stuff. This is very like intellectual dance music, right? Um, and it's got horns in it. And it's like the only records I ever heard that had horns in them were by like the Specials or Madness, but this is a dance record and it's got horns in it. What the hell is this, right? So I just remember that 8 minutes and 40 something seconds of it and going, this is great. And I literally the next day went to the mall and I went to the Camelot Music at the mall and they didn't have it. So then I went down to the other end of the mall. That's the mall where all the like trendy kids went, was we call them the socias. That was their kind of section of the mall, right? Because this was next to the Limited and all the other stuff at the mall, and Jeans West and Kids Ask Your Parents. So I went to Musicland, right? And they had it, and I bought Pleased by the Pet Shop Boys on cassette and vinyl, just only knowing West End Girls, right?
At the same time?
Yeah, I bought them both at the same time because I'm like, I'm going to want to listen to the. I think, and I was just like, I'm like, I'm not really sure what this is, right? I'm not really sure what this cover is, but this is not a pop album cover. This is like, I'm like, this isn't Warhol. This isn't like a Beatle cover. It's not like a Rush cover. It's not really like an eye-popping cover that makes you want to buy the record in any way, right? Because the 80s were all about buying albums based on their album covers. Like you would buy a record that you had no idea what it sounded like if the cover looked cool, like across all these genres, right? And this is like, I'm not really sure what this is. This is very nondescript. Little did I know that they also were very nondescript. So it starts off with 2 divided by 0, right? It's fantastic. It's about like sort of leaving someplace, and it's like kind of like being on the run. This is a theme you see in a lot of the Pet Shop Boy. Welcome to my dissertation on the Pet Shop Boys. This is sort of like this theme you see in their music, this idea of like escapism and running. And it's like, well, let's not go out. We'll take the late train. I've got enough money to pay on the way. Like this, like we got to get away type of thing, right? Which is kind of like later you didn't realize this is kind of like, and this is weird coming from a straight kid, but it's very much this idea of like gay youth getting away and fleeing to someplace they're accepted, which is also a theme of their music later, right? So that's 2 divided by 0. Then you get West End Girls, which, it's got the like, it starts with like walking feet and traffic and horns. And like, this is like a field recording almost, right? Then you get Opportunities, and Opportunities is very much the sound of Thatcher's England, right? And it's very much this like, you didn't realize it at the time, but it's very much this like paean against capitalism, like, and sort of like consumerist culture, right? I've got the brains, you've got the looks, it's kind of like you can't have each of those on your side, but it's also got this idea of like, oh, you're very glamorous. Suburbia, which is about a punk movie called Suburbia, again, it's like, so it's kind of like this record about like how suburbia is kind of killing the creative vibe of cities and things, right? Then you get Tonight Is Forever, which is a song they later recorded with Liza Minnelli. And that's all about like, again, I'm going out clubbing. They made a lot of records where people are going clubbing or running away, but Tonight Is Forever is kind of like, we're at the club and it's never going to close, and I'm out with people that I like. And this is something that's a teenager in the 80s, this idea of like, I am at a party or a club or something with other people that are just like me, and I feel accepted, right? It's very much about that. I Want to Love Her, at the time, until my brother came home on Christmas and explained that my understanding of I Want to Love Her is way different than what the understanding of I Want to Love Her is on the record, right? But there's a sense of urgency, like, I need a lover now, right? Love Comes Quickly is very much sort of like, you meet someone, it's like getting hit in the face and you don't know what to do about it, right? And for someone that's filled with testosterone and hormones and sort of discovering who they are, no matter what sex you are, right? This idea of sooner or later this happens to everyone, it's like the perfect song for like, this is the first time I fell in love, or this is the sound of like, I'm in love and I don't know what to do, right? That's what this record kind of is, right? Interesting choice for single. And then you get Later Tonight, which is really slow and sad, right? You know, it's sort of like this ballad, and it's very sad and melancholy. He is the head boy at the School of Thought. I'm like, wow, I don't know what that is, but that's fucking amazing, right? And it's just sort of like dreary and sad and that, right? And then you go back, the yin and yang of the first track, 2 divided by 0, which is like, we got to get away. Let's go. Let's get out of here now. Leave all your bags. We're going, right? So Why Don't We Live Together, which is very much, okay, we're on the run, or we are cut from the same cloth or whatever. I've met this person who is similar to me. Why don't we live together, right? It's like this very much idea of being comfortable in your own skin and being comfortable with who you are, right? But it's also sort of like has this really great way of describing relationships in the 80s, pre-AIDS, right? Because you get, I find you when I want you and I lose you late at night, and then, the woman in me shouts out, the man in me just smiles. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, a little light bulb went on there, but I'm like, I didn't care, right? This record also made me realize that, like, as a straight suburban white male, I could listen to records made by gay people and it was perfectly fucking fine, right?
Yeah.
What's funny is, my brother came home this Christmas, and I was playing this and an Erasure record and like something else, and he keeps looking in my room and looking at me and looking at, and so finally he sits down. He's like, "Do you know what this is?" I'm like, "Yeah," and he's like, "But you're not." And I'm like, "No." He's like, "Okay." So musically, I don't think it gives enough credit that this record, and certainly to a certain extent the Erasure record too, sort of broke down a lot of the boundaries between in the 80s of what, like, it was perfectly okay for straight kids to listen to like Bowie or Culture Club or any of this stuff, made by sexually ambiguous people. It just didn't, it's sort of the next step from the 70s and sort of the androgynous look, right? And this record kind of is an underscoring for me in that part of my life where I'm like, you know what, music is music and it's okay. Because I was listening to, OMD and the Pet Shop Boys and Soft Cell and the Jesus and Mary Chain and Echo and the Bunnymen and that first Tears for Fears record all at the same time, and it was okay, right? It all spoke to me. The other neat thing about this record too is that this is the time, obviously you've got Thatcher's Britain going on, but we literally stop, drop, and roll. Everyone thinks that their nuclear bomb's going to drop, and that's going to be it. And this is a record that kind of escapes that. That sort of urgency about everything kind of comes from that paranoia of the Cold War, but you get it's not like a U2 record where they beat it over the head like the bomb's coming, or like Heaven 17 with Let's All Make a Bomb. It's kind of a little bit of an escape from that. So that is my very long roundabout way to talk about how I got to the Pet Shop Boys, please.
All right.
And you're like, I never have to listen to this fucking record ever again.
This is a topic we're going to have to save for another time, but I find it really interesting when you have the emergence of a lot of these gay artists and the effect that AIDS had on that situation and how it changed the way that the message coming from these bands. I find it super interesting.
Well, I didn't want to get into this.
No, we're not. We can't,
because it's heavy. But like when my brother got sick, this is one of the records that I would listen to sort of cope with that, right? And really sort of bring, just sort of as an escape from that. Wow. And the three big things I think in the 80s, and this is why the 80s are different than the 90s, right? Because the 90s, the Gulf War, right? The 80s, you've got everyone's worried about the bomb. You've got the AIDS crisis, and then you've got Thatcher and Reagan, right? Everyone's making these anti-Thatcher Reagan records, right? It's almost like become a fad, like, oh, I hate Thatcher, right? But those are kind of the three big themes of the 80s. And they all interweave with each other, but they all have profoundly influenced popular culture since then, right? And this is like one of those instances as well. But yeah, I think that's a topic worth exploring too.
Yeah.
Because you really see, you see Bronski Beat and Mark Almond and all these other people. It's
Right.
like the rise of like prominent gay artists. Mark Almond made a record with Gene Pitney, who couldn't be out when he was making records.
Yeah. Right.
So you get a lot of that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it super interesting. And every one of these songs that you have talked about puts me right back in that place and the mindset at that time and the atmosphere. Man, all those things are just, 3.5 minute time travel machines.
But it also, was a really great way for people of my generation to have conversations about like, what's it like being a non-straight guy, right? Whether you're a guy or a girl, right? I mean, there was a lot of really great sitting around with people, whether you're listening to the Smiths or this or the Cure, you're talking about, there's people from these different backgrounds and lifestyles. And, I had some very fantastic queer friends at this time that were just figuring out who they were at the same time I'm figuring out who I am, sexually wise and personality wise and all that, right? And this music was like one of the few things at that time that really unified people. And this is one of those records that could do that because it was so amorphous that it didn't really, they weren't being photographed with women. They didn't write, they didn't use pronouns in their records till later, right? So you're like, is he singing about a man or a woman? You don't really know.
Yeah.
So that's very much of that time. So that is our lecture on the 80s.
Right.
Thank you, Try the Veal.
All right, bring it on home. We got one more to go.
So first of all, Professor Allen, I know that when you guys came up with this idea, you probably all got in a huddle somewhere and say, let's break Rob, let's make him only pick 5 records, right? Which I'm sure for you is really hard too, right? To pick 5. But so I'm having that high fidelity moment where I'm trying to pick 5, and I'm walking around as early as this morning, with Janet, and I'm like, well, I got 3. What other 2 should I pick? I like this one, but I don't like this one. It's like literally trying to figure out where you're going to go, right? How do you explain who you are as a person who listens to music and as a human being in 5 records, right? I'm like, do I put in Marvin Gaye? Do I put in Bach? Do I go with Ben Webster or John Coltrane? Or do I go with, the Specials or Madness? Or do I go with the Dead Kennedy? Where the hell am I going with this, right? So my basic idea was strip this down to the bare parts, records that profoundly influenced who I am today, but I also loved as a kid, right? And I a lot of the records I heard growing up in my house by osmosis, like the first time I heard Frampton Comes Alive was when that record was out and my sisters played the hell out of it. And when they snuck in my window, because one night, because they snuck out to go see Peter Frampton play a concert at Six Flags, and they were using my window to crawl in and out after curfew. So I mean, I very much am influenced by records that I heard at the time, which I think I mentioned before. But this one, I think everybody, since it came out, from the beginning of time when this record came out to now, is in some way, shape, or form influenced by this record if they are not insane, right?
Okay.
It's pretty, I was like, I don't care if this is not cool. I don't care if this is like an obvious pick. And I don't care if it like doesn't check off boxes for indie cred. It's a record that is a fundamentally monumental piece of Western music, not 20th century, not 18th century. It is fundamentally one of the most important pieces of music ever released by anyone. And I'm talking about Debbie Gibson's Out of the Blue.
You are not.
No, I'm not.
I mean, it's a good record, I will say.
So, Sgt. Pepper.
All right, now.
There are I will say that there are better records by the Beatles. I freely admit that.
Yeah.
But in terms of a concept album, in terms of like here's the thing with Sgt. Pepper. As much as I love Abbey Road and I love all of their records, right? Trying to pick a favorite Beatles record is like trying to decide which of your kids you don't want to stab, right? When they make you mad. Which don't do that, by the way. But the thing about it is they made a record with Sergeant Pepper that 50 or 60 years later is the perfect gateway to the Beatles for anybody, right?
Mm, yeah.
If you want to say, okay, you like the Beatles, you can't really start with the White Album or Revolver, right? You're like, start with Sergeant Pepper. Here's what's going on. If you want to understand the dynamic of how they write songs, if you want to understand their artistic vision, if you want to understand their intense ferocity with production, Sergeant Pepper's kind of the place to start, right?
Hmm.
Um, you know, you get, and it's, I think it's the first concept. I mean, the two concept records I remember hearing in my adolescence were Xanadu and this, right? And then later ELO, right? Which is related to Xanadu. But like, I'm just like, what's a concept? I didn't really know what a concept record was when I first heard this, right? But I knew my brother played it. I knew my sisters liked it. I knew the kids in, like, when I was a kid in grade school, people knew about this record. And then this is the record in high school that as the big burly jock guys are about ready to punch you in the face, you can go, wait, I like Sergeant Pepper. And then they wouldn't beat you up, right? Because they realized you had this like common musical ground, right? I mean, you could still be punk rock and listen to this record. You could still be into hip hop and love this record. You could be into new wave, because there wouldn't be an Echo and the Bunnymen or a Jesus and Mary Chain or even a Pet Shop Boys without something like this, or even Pet
Hmm.
Sounds, right?
Yeah.
But conceptually it's great. It's got this like vibe on it that's like, it's a band that is confident in every single thing they're doing and is uncompromising, right?
Yeah.
Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Band is great. With a little help from my friends is kind of like this really cool bar song, in the same way that Piano Man is like a bar song later. This is kind of like the song everybody would sing at a bar, with a little help from my friends. And then you get, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. I'm like, I didn't know what LSD was, but I just know it sounded goofy and weird, and it wasn't Alvin and the Chipmunks, and it was great, right? I like Fixing a Hole. I like She's Leaving Home is amazing.
Yeah, that's a great song.
She's Leaving Home is the record I don't think people really appreciate, and For the Benefit of Mr. Kite is great. When I'm 64, though, is it's still just a fantastically charming, upbeat piece of music, right? Lovely Rita's great. Good Morning is great.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it's not my favorite, but it's
No.
good. I mean, it's a later part of the record thing. But then you get to A Day in the Life, and you're just like, we've talked about this before. At the end of it's,
Yeah.
It's like that's just a work of like spontaneity that's amazing, right? So if you think about start of the record, end of the record, and the steps going in between, there's a couple missteps. Don't get me wrong, but it's a nice musical journey that any person can listen to any point in time. If I want to have, my nieces listen to something that I like, I can play this. If I want to have, my Uncle Fran around and play something that he likes, it's a nice safe
Hmm.
space.
Yeah.
Before we get the idea of safe spaces, it's a safe space. A lot of the Beatles records are safe spaces for people, right? But this one, wrestling with, it's a double-edged sword, because like, oh god, I gotta pick 5 records. It's like, oh shit, I gotta pick one Beatles record, right? Because I easily could just pick 5, right?
Oh, easily.
um
Yeah.
and I love each Beatles record for different reasons.
Hmm.
This one, I think, because it's important, because so many people discovered the Beatles through Sergeant Pepper. And then, this is a record that's like, you could discover the Kinks from there. You can discover, I have some friends of mine that are really into Judas Priest, but their sort of entryway to listening to music was Sergeant Pepper, and that sort of led down a very long road that took them, to Judas Priest and Motley Crue and stuff like that. Even though this is nothing like that in sound, um, it's also fun visually to look at the record, just its packaging and everything.
Hmm.
That was really cool. If you're 9 years old and you're holding up this record and you're like taking it apart and looking at it, you're like, what is all this stuff, right? It's got crap inside of it. What is this, right? And what's a gatefold? It's still fun to open up the vinyl and look at the packaging on it. It's just such a complete concept from, it's like an art project almost instead of a record. I think going back to what I talked to about Warhol before and
Mm.
Velvet Underground, I think it's kind of like that too, but I think this is the everyman's record. I think if you and I went to like 50 people's houses randomly, we each went to 25 people's houses each, right? I would say that at least half of them, if not more, would have a copy of Sergeant Pepper, no matter what background they were from, what else they liked. They could have a Kix record or an REM record, or they could have Prince or Stevie Wonder, or they could have, I don't know, they could have the Humpty Dance 12-inch. I don't know, right? But whatever it is, they're going to have a copy of Sergeant Pepper. And like I was really amazed in high school when I knew like a ton of the kids that were into hip hop, that I was always asking like, what is this? Tell me about this and stuff. They knew about Sergeant Pepper, right? So I can't figure out what it is, but it's just one of these records that sort of like everybody knows about. Everybody kind of goes, yeah, that's cool, but then it's also musically interesting,
Mm-hmm. When you were kind of going through the track by track thing, when you talk about musically interesting, you left out my favorite track on this album.
I probably did not do that on purpose, but go ahead.
And that is the George song, Within You, Without You.
Oh my God. Yes. That's fantastic. Yes.
Oh my God. I mean,
yes.
And it is so different from everything else on the record.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, that's quite all right. It gave me the chance to bring it up. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that this is really the point where Harrison is, I mean, he's been writing songs for the band for a few albums now. And I think this is really where you're starting to see what a major talent that he is. This is like that pivot point for him almost.
And he's my favorite Beatle in all candor, right? But I think this is where he's the guy that's edging himself in to between the door and saying, okay, here I am. Like there's two guys in the door and he's like pushing his way through it. Yeah. He's kind of jostling McCartney and Lennon aside and say, hey, what about me, guys? And I think a lot of the production stuff that you hear on this record is more George than any of the other Beatles. I think he's really interested in production. I think he's trailing Martin around. I think he's really starting to think about songwriting as a craft and using other instruments. And they invented the breakbeat inadvertently with this record, right? But yeah, I think that is probably one of Harrison's best songs. It has nothing to do. I've had to remind people. I've been at a couple parties, in college. I'm like, no, that's With or Without You. This is different. But I think it's because it's the Midwest. I think you're right. I think it's Harrison's big moment, and I'm not sure I don't think it's his best, but I think it's his top 5.
Oh, it's not his best.
No.
You know which one I think is his best.
I think Here Comes the Sun is his best.
It is by far.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a lot of great songs, but holy shit, is that an amazing song?
Yeah. So I didn't mean to skip that one. Sorry, I was just trying
to. No, that's quite all right.
Yeah.
I wasn't criticizing you.
Oh, okay, good.
So we only have like a minute and a half left. So just out of curiosity, what were your 2 alts? Without going into detail, just say what they
are. Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, which is fantastic. Yeah, Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life.
Oh, okay.
Here's the wild card where Alan's like, what? AC/DC Back in Black.
Really?
And, yeah, which I
would never have guessed.
Fucking love AC/DC. Which is funny. I know. And then I almost Ben Webster's Soulville. Ben Webster is a jazz saxophonist who's amazing. He's fantastic. I almost put there's a couple different things. I really wanted to put a Sparks record on, but I'm like, well, Anthony's going to do this later, and I can't pick just one. I love all the Go-Go's records for different reasons. The Go-Go's and the Ramones and Bowie are like, well, I can't just pick one. Talking Heads, I can't just pick one. So it was really hard, but I think I was leaning towards What's Going On, Songs in the Key of Life.
Yeah.
Sign of the Times,
Ooh,
which is just, I know we're talking about concept art, but that's a powerhouse record that I love.
yeah,
And I
absolutely.
remember seeing the movie and just being blown away by that.
Yeah.
Um, Also weird, Houses of the Holy by Led Zeppelin, which I came to a little later in life, but I'm
Hmm.
like, this thing's a powerhouse too. It's just
Wow.
incredible. Um, and OMD Crush, because I listened to that all the time in college or in high school.
Well, we are at the very end of our show when we finally have a comment that has come in, and it is from somebody we both know very well, Stephanie Seymour,
Hey,
our lovely co-host. Hi, Stephanie. We love you. Thank you for chiming in.
hey ho.
And Stephanie, I'm going to be calling on you to do this show next time. So get your 5 picks ready.
I came really close to putting the Aquanettas on my list. I really did, but I didn't.
All right. So thanks, Rob, for sitting in with me
Oh,
and
yeah,
doing this and going through the torture of only picking 5 albums to talk about.
yeah. It's
So
therapy.
yeah, so this series is intended to be every once in a while, maybe once a month. You know, we've got our regular podcast that's going to be coming out every 2 weeks, and in between that, we'll be doing another one of these. You know, occasionally, maybe twice a month, maybe once a month. We'll see. If you're interested in being a guest on it, just drop an email to modernmusicology1@gmail, or just comment on our socials or something, or message us on Facebook or whatever, and we'll get to you. We'd love to have you on. And thanks for watching our first one. We'll be back soon. Rob, you have a great night.
You too,
Everybody who's
sir.
watching, have a great night, and keep rocking on.